Okay, so for this deep dive, you guys have sent in a pretty crazy story. We're talking about Rodrigo Duterte, the former president of the Philippines, and his arrest. Like, it's been all over the news. The Guardian, the New York Times, Axios, The Economist. It's huge. Clearly, this is a story with, some serious global implications. But why now? Duterte's been out of office for a while, and his controversial war on drugs wasn't exactly a secret. So what's changed? What's the missing piece here that led to his arrest?
That's the question, isn't it? You've hit the nail on the head, I think, to really understand what's going on. We need to go back to the beginning. We need to talk about Duterte's war on drugs and the thousands of deaths that are linked to it.
Yeah, and it's not just the number of deaths, it's the way it all happened. The Guardian article that you sent me paints a pretty disturbing picture. We're talking allegations of police brutality, extrajudicial killings, even possible financial incentives for these actions. That's pretty heavy stuff.
Yeah, it is. The articles you've provided mention estimates of anywhere between 6,000 to 30,000 deaths. That discrepancy alone speaks volumes about how difficult it is to get a clear picture of what really happened. The Guardian article even mentions that while police often claim self-defense, evidence suggests many victims were unarmed, shot multiple times even in the back.
Oh, wow.
It's a dark chapter in the Philippines' recent history.
It is. And from what I've read, this wasn't some sort of underground operation. Duterte was very open about his approach.
Yes, very much so. And that's what makes this case so unusual on the international stage. Duterte didn't just condone these actions, he actively encouraged them. He openly urged the police to kill suspected drug dealers and even encouraged the public to do the same. The Guardian quotes him as saying, "Many will die, plenty will be killed until the last pusher is out of the streets."
It's like he was daring someone to challenge him.
It really is.
And yet for years, nothing happened. Then bam, he's arrested in Hong Kong just days after joking about building a monument to himself holding a gun. What was he thinking?
Well, it's a fascinating psychological question. Yeah. But legally speaking, the key to his arrest lies with the International Criminal Court, or the ICC. The ICC was created to step in when national governments are unwilling or unable to prosecute these serious international crimes. It's a court of last resort.
But wouldn't that mean that countries could just ignore the ICC if they wanted to? I mean, how much power do they really have?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. The ICC has no army, no police force of its own. It relies entirely on the cooperation of member states to enforce its warrants. And as you pointed out, Duterte withdrew the Philippines from the ICC back in 2019, presumably thinking this would shield him from any repercussions.
So this arrest suggests that his gamble didn't pay off. But why now? What's changed since 2019?
Okay, well, that's where the political intrigue comes in. Current President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has decided to cooperate with the ICC, even though he's also chosen not to rejoin the court.
Wait, so he's willing to cooperate with a court he doesn't want to be part of?
Yep.
Okay, there's got to be a reason for that.
There are a few possible explanations. Some analysts believe that Marcos is trying to distance himself from Duterte's legacy, trying to build his own reputation on the world stage. It's worth noting that Duterte's own daughter, Sarah, is currently the vice president.
Wow, so we've got a political dynasty clashing with international justice? This is getting good.
It is.
Okay, so Duterte's been arrested, but what happens next? Does he just get a slap on the wrist?
Not at all. He's been extradited to The Hague to face trial. The ICC issued the arrest warrant on charges of murder as a crime against humanity, focusing on killings that allegedly took place both during his time as mayor of Davao and his presidency.
Wait, so this isn't just about his actions as president?
It goes way back. The ABC News article you sent highlights that Duterte's brutal approach to crime was well known, even when he was mayor of Davao.
So this was a pattern of behavior, not a sudden shift when he took national office.
That's what the ICC will be investigating. The arrest warrant, as reported by Global News, states that there are reasonable grounds to believe these attacks on victims were both widespread and systematic, and that thousands of people appear to have been killed.
Okay, well, hold on. We need to take a breath here and consider the scale of what we're talking about. A former world leader being arrested for crimes against humanity. This is huge. What kind of impact could this have, not just in the Philippines, but globally?
You're right to ask that. The potential impact is enormous. Domestically, this arrest could force a reevaluation of Duterte's legacy. Global News even interviewed families of some of the victims, and they celebrated the arrest. They called it a long-awaited step toward justice and a blow against impunity, and now they're demanding investigations into the police and officials who carried out the killings.
Well, that must be incredibly cathartic for those families to finally see some movement towards accountability. It's got to be a mix of so many emotions.
Absolutely.
Relief, anger, hope.
This case has also sent shockwaves through the international community. News outlets around the world are covering this story, from the New York Times to The Economist. The Economist even called this arrest a matter of global importance. It's a stark reminder that the ICC exists to ensure justice when national governments fail to do so.
So could this be a turning point, not just for the Philippines, but for the ICC itself?
Potentially, yes. This case is a major test of the ICC's legitimacy and power. And it's a test with global implications.
We've covered a lot of ground here, but it feels like this is just the beginning. What started with a simple question about Duterte's arrest has turned into a deep dive into the complexities of international justice, political maneuvering, and the human cost of violence. But there's still so much to unpack. Join us for part 2, where we'll explore how Duterte rose to power and maintained his grip on the Philippines despite these horrific allegations.
We'll delve into the factors that allowed his war on drugs to unfold and examine the complex social and political dynamics that are now being exposed by his arrest. This is far from over.
So as we were talking about Duterte's tactics and his, defiance of the ICC in the last part, something really struck me. It's the sheer boldness of it all. Like, this isn't some dictator operating in the shadows. Duterte was practically bragging about his disregard for human rights on the world stage.
Yeah, you're right to highlight that. His audacity is definitely a key element of this whole case. And it speaks to a wider trend that we're seeing globally, this rise in populist leaders who appeal to, public fears and anxieties, often at the expense of democratic norms and the rule of law.
Okay, so how does someone like Duterte gain so much power, even with these horrifying allegations hanging over his head? How did he manage to hold on to power for so long?
Well, that's a complex question, but the articles you sent offer some clues. There are a few factors at play. First, as we touched upon earlier, there's a widespread fear of crime and violence in the Philippines. Duterte expertly tapped into that fear, presenting himself as the tough guy, a strong man who could deliver quick solutions. He promised swift and decisive action, and he certainly delivered on that, though maybe not in the way that people expected.
And people were willing to overlook the human cost of those solutions. I mean, these were their fellow citizens being killed?
Sadly, yes. For many, the promise of safety and order outweighed concerns about human rights. It's a tragic pattern we see throughout history. When people feel threatened, they're more likely to accept or even embrace authoritarian measures.
That's a pretty sobering thought, but fear alone can't explain Duterte's widespread popularity. There must have been something more to it.
Exactly. Duterte had an undeniable charisma. He cultivated this image of a man of the people, someone who spoke their language, someone who understood their struggles. He was known for his colorful language and his disdain for the elite.
Oh, absolutely. He was always railing against the establishment, positioning himself as this outsider, this rebel fighting against a corrupt system.
And that resonated deeply with many Filipinos who felt ignored and marginalized by the traditional political system.
So it was a mix of fear, a longing for security, and a clever manipulation of public sentiment.
Precisely. And we can't overlook the role of nationalism and anti-Western rhetoric in Duterte's rise to power. He frequently criticized the United States and other Western countries, accusing them of hypocrisy and interference in Philippine affairs. This resonated with a segment of the population who resented the West and its influence.
That's a potent mix, especially when you consider the Philippines' history as a former U.S. colony. So Duterte's war on drugs wasn't just about fighting crime, was it? It was a calculated political strategy.
Yes, and one that exploited deep social and political divisions within the Philippines. And now with his arrest, those divisions are becoming even more apparent. The ICC's involvement has thrown a real wrench into the Philippine political landscape, creating new alliances and rivalries.
And how is this arrest affecting Duterte's own daughter, the current vice president? She's been pretty vocal in her support for her father, hasn't she?
She has. Sara Duterte has strongly condemned the arrest, calling it a violation of her father's rights and accusing the Marcos administration of surrendering her father to a foreign court. Remember, the Philippines is no longer a member of the ICC.
So could this create a rift between her and President Marcos?
It's certainly a possibility. Some analysts believe that Marcos' decision to cooperate with the ICC was a shrewd move, calculated to weaken the Duterte family's political clout and consolidate his own power.
This is a real-life political thriller. A former president facing charges of crimes against humanity, his daughter challenging the current president, and the ICC trying to assert its authority in this complex and volatile environment.
And let's not forget the thousands of families who lost loved ones during Duterte's war on drugs. Their voices are crucial in this story. They're the ones who've suffered the most, and they deserve to be heard.
Absolutely. These are the human faces of this tragedy. Their stories are a stark reminder that behind the political maneuvering and legal battles, there are real people whose lives have been shattered.
Their testimonies and experiences will be central to the ICC's case. They represent the true cost of Duterte's actions, a cost that can't be ignored or forgotten.
This deep dive has been an emotional roller coaster. We've gone from the shock of the arrest to the horrors of the war on drugs, the rise and fall of a political strongman, and the complex world of international justice. But there's still so much more to explore.
You're right. We've only just scratched the surface of the ICC's role in all of this. Join us for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll examine the challenges and opportunities facing the ICC as it navigates this high-stakes case, and consider what it all means for the future of international justice.
You know, as we wrap up our deep dive into Duterte's arrest, it's clear this case is about so much more than just one man.
Oh, absolutely. It raises some really fundamental questions about, countries' sovereignty and the reach of international law.
Yeah, and we've seen this tension play out before with other ICC cases, right?
For sure. The ICC has often faced pushback, even from powerful nations like the United States, which has never officially joined the court.
And even for countries that are members, like the Philippines was, they can always choose to withdraw or just refuse to cooperate.
Exactly. The ICC's effectiveness depends entirely on countries willingly upholding their commitments to international law.
So where does that leave the ICC? Are they destined to be all bark and no bite, unable to actually hold these powerful leaders accountable?
It's a valid concern. It's a challenge the court has been grappling with since its inception. But I wouldn't write the ICC off just yet. This arrest shows they can still exert pressure, even on those who try to avoid their jurisdiction.
That's true. But even in this case, Duterte's arrest wouldn't have happened if the current Philippine government hadn't cooperated right.
You're absolutely right. It highlights how important domestic political will is in bringing perpetrators of international crimes to justice.
So it seems like the ICC can't work in isolation. They need partners, both within the countries they're investigating and from the broader international community.
Exactly. And forming those partnerships can be complicated, often tangled up in political considerations.
Okay, this brings us back to a question we touched on earlier. What kind of precedent does Duterte's arrest set for other controversial leaders around the world?
Well, it sends a strong message that no one is above the law. Impunity is not a guarantee even for those at the highest levels of power.
But that message is probably going to be interpreted differently depending on each country's political climate.
Of course. Some leaders might see it as a warning, a sign to clean up their act. Others might dig in their heels and become even more defiant of international norms.
And in the end, the ICC's ability to act will depend on the level of support they receive from the global community.
Absolutely. The court's legitimacy is constantly under scrutiny. Their success relies on building strong partnerships and proving their commitment to being fair and impartial.
Well, it seems like we're ending this deep dive with more questions than answers, but isn't that often the case when you really start digging into a complex topic?
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. This sparks further exploration and encourages critical thinking about these complicated global issues.
Duterte's case is a stark reminder that international justice isn't a quick fix. It's an ongoing process. There will always be challenges and complexities.
But it's a process worth fighting for. Ultimately, it's about upholding human dignity and ensuring accountability for those who violate those fundamental rights.
Yeah, those principles are absolutely essential for a just and equitable world.
Couldn't agree more. And while we don't know the outcome of Duterte's trial, yet his arrest has already sparked a crucial conversation around international justice.
It's a conversation we need to keep having, engaging with diverse perspectives and striving for a future where leaders are held responsible for their actions no matter how powerful they may be.
Well said. This deep dive has been a journey into the very heart of international justice, and that journey doesn't end here.
We encourage you to keep exploring this topic, seek out different viewpoints, and really consider the implications of this case for the future of our world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's ignited your curiosity and inspired you to learn more.
Until next time, keep diving.